welcome everyone. This is session 4 of day 2 for the Slop Conference. Belong and Sincerity have curated this conference to bring important discussions on different aspects of AI Slop, what it is, how it's evolving, how it's affecting all of us in different sectors, and what are possible ways forward. This panel is called the Grant Proposal Lottery when polish beats impact. And it's a very key session that looks at how AI Slop is affecting matching processes in the philanthropic capital space. And to have this discussion, I have an amazing panel. So we've got, and I'll introduce them in detail, but we've got Veena from the space that needs capital. We've got Sumit and Arjun from the space that gives capital, but in different ways. Over the next 90 odd minutes, we'll explore different parts of this question and this puzzle. I'll start out by sort of providing a little bit of context, then introducing the panelists, and then we'll have about 6, 7 questions and go really deep into different aspects of this piece. So let me just begin with a little bit of context setting the way we were thinking about this. So the context is that philanthropic capital obviously plays a very, very important role in society. It solves for different kinds of market failures. It funds organizations that provide very vital services to people who would otherwise not have it. Philanthropic capital is very diverse, very heterogeneous. So it ranges all the way from very, very large philanthropies who give multi-million-dollar grants after a very thoughtful process, which is very scientific and evaluates different aspects. We also have retail philanthropy somewhere in the middle, which looks at a larger number of nonprofits and allocates capital. And then we've got obviously individual philanthropy, where individuals make choices in very informal ways. So there's a whole spectrum. The kinds of things that philanthropy ends up funding are also very heterogeneous. You've got different mixtures of technical expertise that are required. For instance, a lot of the climate work or a lot of the water work, health work, these are deeply technical topics which require the right kind of expertise to come together. And there are other topics which are more, let's say, community centered, where technical expertise may not be that important, but real human relationships, the art of working well with people, genuine empathy, genuine grounding in a certain community, those things end up being super important. When philanthropic capital matchmaking processes work well, a lot of value gets created, but there's also type 1 and type 2 errors in this whole process. False positives and false negatives. So organizations that should get capital, they don't sometimes get capital. That's a false negative, and false positive is where you sometimes end up allocating capital to organizations that may not be the best place to deploy that capital. So that's the spectrum. Now, what's happening, and typically in any of these processes, there's different kinds of coded signals that are used to assess who to give capital to, right? So by that I mean a proposal is a coded signal. A well-written proposal by the right kind of organization details out what their method is, what the experience is, what their take on the problem is, what their approach is, and if it's written well, it can be evaluated, and then you can have a good decision. Similarly, you could actually have a coded signal from a community that or a set of people who really are facing a certain problem. Let's say floods have happened in a certain setting, and you need some basic infrastructure to be deployed. So again, let's say a video from that community or spelling out what the problem is a coded signal, which then can be evaluated, and then capital can be deployed. Now, the problem with AI is that it's becoming very easy to create signals that are not linked to the inherent expertise or the passion of an organization. So it becomes earlier, a very thoughtful proposal was what economists call a costly signal, right? It takes time to put together a thoughtful proposal. It takes expertise. It takes years of experience to actually put together something. So that's a costly signal, and it gets evaluated. But now with generative AI models improving, that correlation between the signal quality and the inherent qualities or the expertise or the passion or the commitment of the organizations that create these signals, that correlation has broken down. And it leads to something called a babbling equilibrium. This is again an economics term where there's so much noise that the signal itself is not decipherable. You lead to a lot of the error rates in decision making increase dramatically. So your false negatives and false positives increase quite dramatically. So that's what we'll discuss in this panel about where do we find ourselves in. right now, are you already seeing this? Is it just the glass half empty picture? Of course, there's a lot of positive value that AI is also bringing. So how can we harness the best of that without falling into the trap of the worst of this? So those are the kinds of questions that we'll probe. And let me begin by just introducing the panel. We've got three fantastic folks, like I said. So first, we've got Dr. Veena Srinivasan, who's the founder and ED of Well Labs, which is the Water, Environment, Land and Livelihood Labs, and a senior fellow at ATRI. She's a Stanford PhD and IIT Bombay alumna, and she's on the board, global board of ISME, which is the International Water Management Institute, and chair of the Strategic Advisory Group for UN SDG 6 Integrated Monitoring Initiative. She's the winner of the 2023 IWA Water and Development Award, and amongst the leading scientists who've been cited globally. And she has written extensively about the funding of science and the relationship between funders and grantees and the production of honest knowledge. And she's also got a lot of real world experience implementing innovations, carrying out research in the field. So, Veena, welcome. Great to have you here. Um,
Thanks, Jason.
then we've got Arjun Venkatraman, who's a program officer for digital and AI at the Gates Foundation India Country Office. Arjun is a computer science engineer who spent years as a product manager in the Valley. He returned to India to found the Mojo Lab Foundation, which reduced IVR deployment costs significantly, and also powered CGNet Swara, which is a voice-based citizen journalism platform used by tribal communities across different states. He was named an Ashoka Fellow in 2014 for transforming communities in remote conflict areas, from passive witnesses to proactive voices. He holds a Master's of Business Law from National Law School and is a very thoughtful funder and also a commentator on how AI is developing and all the different uses of AI, public good uses of AI. Welcome, Arjun. Great to have you here. Then, last but not least, we've got Sumit. Sumit Tayal is the CEO of Give, which is India's largest giving platform, connects more than a couple of million donors to over 3,000 verified nonprofits. He's an IIM Bangalore MBA with backgrounds in management consulting and private equity. He joined Give as a volunteer during the second COVID wave and stayed permanently. Under his leadership, Give has built a three-tier guaranteed trust seal system for non-profit verification and also acquired the Goodera's India's CSR grant management platform. Welcome, Sumit. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Neeraj.
Okay, awesome. So let me jump into the question straight away. So before we come to the question of how AI slop is affecting it, let's start with the baseline question of what in your mind is a good philanthropic capital allocation process to begin with, right? And what are the properties of a good system which reliably gets resources to the organizations that will use them best? Is it about the quality of the signal, the proposal? Is it relationships? Is it the track record? And does it differ based on both the kind of philanthropy we are talking about and the kind of, or let's say, for instance, strategic philanthropy versus retail giving? And does it vary by the kind of topic we're talking about? So let me start with you, Arjun, first. What's your definition of a good philanthropic capital allocation process?
Yeah. So I think important to put in a little bit of context first. The kind of investments, at least the part of the organization that I belong to, makes is more in the digital AI, health R&D, innovation space, right? So these are typically fairly technical investments in that sense. Evaluation is relatively mathematical because you're typically lowering the cost of something or increasing access to something, or there's a very clear number that you're moving in some sense, right? So and there's a clear cost point at which you want to move that number, and so evaluating something becomes relatively very easy. And so therefore, I feel like we are blessed to be suffering from less of this concern around slop overclogging an evaluation pipeline, because no matter how much slop you put around the numbers kind of work out for themselves, and it's very easy to extract numerical data from any amount of context, right? So essentially, if you have an LLM, you throw in and you get what is the numerical story here, and that's pretty straightforward to shim it down. I feel like this problem of slop would exist more in evaluation pipelines which rely on large scale intake. And I think that construct itself might now need reevaluation in terms of if this signal is no longer a differentiator, then what would make a difference. And then I think there are good ways of doing that. I think one thing which we do quite a bit, even with our limited area of evaluation, is request for brevity rather than length. And I mean, it's much harder to put in a short version of something than a long meandering version of it, right? And that it's also a question of how skilled you are with using AI. And there are entities who are and in that regard, it's relatively democratic. Then that people who earlier would not have had an opportunity to send a one pager in can now do it because they actually have a tool that has them summarize stuff that they've been doing for a long time quickly in language that's easy for a funder to understand. You can literally give it that prompt. Where that is done effectively, those one pages are really very effective because it's good use of AI. You essentially used a tool that's now available to now provide something in a format that's consumable. So I think that's the broad picture. I'll pause there. I'd love to hear from the other folks as well.
Yeah, so you're saying that for a field, for a domain like yours in which you invest, which is technical, numbers and brevity and to the point kind of articulation are two properties of a good process. So what about you? You obviously are on the retail side of things, retail side of giving, and you build these different trust seals and so on. So what does a good process look like for you, and how has this definition evolved for you in the last few years?
So, for retail giving, there are really two things that determine the grant decision, the donation decision in this case, right? First and foremost, there has to be gratification for the donor, right? It's an emotional decision. It's being done for a very, very, and I don't mean gratification only in a negative way, right? You may be donating out of guilt or you may be donating out of largesse. Either way, the gratification is the donor's gratification, first and foremost, which means that you cannot predict what cause or what image or what word will lead to that. Therefore, the process has to allow for a very, very wide bouquet of options. Also, because it's an emotional decision, it has to be spur of the moment, which means a retail donor will not go evaluating further in depth beyond what is available. There's no second round of questions. There is no further detailing. So what's available is what's used. Decision is made, and then you move on, whether you choose to do it or not. So the process has to allow for very limited information. Too many signals have to be compressed into very few signals, but for a very wide range of objects. And that allows a faster decision for the actual donor. And the process for that really is therefore of defining a threshold and not trying to find the best. Everybody above a threshold is good. Then beyond that point, it's only a measure of who connects with who. Of course, with Slop, the problem is that a lot more people can cross the threshold faster. And it's harder to cross the threshold on compliance. It's harder to cross it on factual data. But retail is also about storytelling. It's become very easy to cross the threshold on storytelling. That has a positive and a negative side. I mean, all the false negatives are able to get there now. It's easier to tell a story. And, if you're operating in a certain language, but the donors operate in English, then you need to reach out to them in English. That's unfortunately the way it is. So that barriers come down for a lot of people for the false negatives, but it also means that a lot more people can tell a very good story, which may not have been possible before. And for a quick decision, it leaves the door wide open for problems.
Yeah, super interesting. And yeah, I love the threshold and how it's super selective. Let's say in Arjun's ecosystem, how it's almost your sort of, you have one level of gate, Sumit, and then anyone over that is flexibly telling the stories and emotional decisions get made. Veena, what about you? You are obviously a scientist and you do work which is deeply technical. And you raise funds which are multi-year and what for you is a good process that allocates capital to an organization like you?
Yeah, I'd like to respond a little bit to both Sumit and Arjun as well. I mean, the challenge that we have as sort of signalers of science-based decision making, right? Often our challenge with the retail fundraising side is that because it's gratification led, the indices and indicators are also gratification based. So, in the sense that I may do a project which doesn't move groundwater levels, but if I'm able to tell a story about a single woman with a goat very effectively and show that picture very well, in a sense, that has no differentiation from I raised groundwater levels in the district. You know what I mean? So, in a sense, there's a challenge that people like us who are, sellers of science-based interventions struggle with when it comes to retail fundraising. Which is not related to AI; it was independent of AI. So the argument that and the second problem is because of kind of gratification being the payoff and not effectiveness being the payoff, you can have a lot of situations where you may not be actually meeting. You have a incentive to basically overstate the success effectiveness because the person doesn't care about that. So the donor's giving me money and they want to feel good. So what I want to give them is feeling good and not actually having solved the problem. So oftentimes what we find is that you can actually have really things which are just feeding the ecosystem, and 10 years people have just given pictures, and then 10 years later somebody holds a board meeting and realizes, okay, the needle didn't move, and then they stop funding to that entire area, but it was because the entire set of indicators was based on gratification. So not gratification, but overselling success maybe. So the case that we've argued for is that if you really want honesty, then what you should really be funding is hypotheses and not funding success, because otherwise we are really struggling with people not wanting to even look under the hood to ask any questions about did this actually work, because they are so afraid that if they tell the donor that it didn't work, they won't get the next round of funding. So the argument we've made is, if we really want honesty in the ecosystem, that means we care about effectiveness in the long run, why can't we fund hypothesis? And then the basis of the funding is the quality of the hypothesis and the ability to execute and deliver on that testing of the hypothesis. So anyway, that's where we are coming from the science, but I thought it was just interesting to see how it intersects with Sumit's way and Arjun's way of thinking. Just one more thing on what Arjun said, in terms of when it comes to funding technical stuff, you're funding AI, digital, innovation and technical stuff. Often you like he said, it's very numbers based. Often a lot of the work that we're doing in the sector on public problem solving, the tech and the expertise and so on is a necessary but insufficient condition. But what you also need is sort of community capacity, trust, these sort of things, and those things are much harder to kind of test and signal in the proposal giving or really at any stage. And that's where
Is it just me? Have we lost Veena? Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you.
Community institutions, so on and so forth.
She's back. Sorry, we lost you for a second there, Veena.
Veena, we lost you for the last maybe 20 seconds.
Often you're missing the community institutions and the trust, and that is something that AI Slop will never be able to capture, the genuineness of the grassroots interaction. You'll be able to get the smoothness of how the hypothesis is stated and so on, even with my ideal case of how funding should be done. And I think there's still a gap, and that's where the AI Slop really plays a role.
Yeah. No, I find what all of you have said super interesting. There's this in philanthropic economics, there's this thing called pure altruism versus impure altruism. Why people give and why people even work in the impact space. So if somebody is purely altruistic, all they care about is the outcome, right? And they're willing to give dollars against that outcome. They don't really And on the impure side, what they care about is something called the warm glow effect, right? When you give, you feel nice about yourself. So everyone feels that. There's a spectrum. In retail giving, it's more impure. In formal giving, it's slightly purer. But of course, a lot of people work in the impact space because we feel that warm glow, right? And the question, I think the point you're making, Veena, is that it's important to calibrate. But there's some stuff about the warm glow that is tied to intangibles, which may not always get communicated, and that might be irreplaceable. But we'll come to that in just a second. I want to understand now that you've talked about the process. Let's now go to what is the use of AI that you're seeing across your entire grant life cycle, right? So how is AI, especially generative AI, starting to pop up in your kind of ecosystems in your work? So Sumit, let me start with you. How you sort of, obviously you have a very high end, you receive probably thousands of organizational profiles, thousands of campaigns. So in the last 6 to 12 months specifically, has something changed as the models have become better and as they become multimodal? Is there something different that you're seeing that you weren't seeing, let's say, even 12 months ago?
Yeah, no, there is a couple of things, right? So also just to clarify, so 50% of my life is retail, and the other 50% is CSR, which are radically different worlds, right? And the application of AI in both places is kind of turning a little differently. But I do think nonprofits so far have been amongst the late adopters of AI. So usage is not that high. Like I don't see radical differences, but a few things have started emerging, of course. I think storytelling is definitely moved up a notch. It's just become a lot easier to do. You'll see better quality of collateral. You'll see better quality of communication. All of that, which also blurs the line between the signals that you spoke about. But that's happening. I think on the one place where it's really getting used very strongly is it's become far easier to justify the theory of change on pretty much anything. So what used to be very hard to build a narrative for, right? If I had to say midday meals lead to better learning, try stitching that story, right? It's a famous story, and I still hear multiple versions of whether it does or not. But to stitch together that narrative of this happens and then that happens, and this was the result of this study, which links to that study, and therefore I am saying this, was a very difficult exercise to do. It's a very easy exercise now. So you can pick any theory of change and you can build a very good narrative on why it's backed by evidence and data, relying on the assumption, which is a fair assumption, that not 90% of your readers will not go deep into the evidence and data. On the CSR side, there's always an RFP process for grants. And RFP processes can draw in extremely large number of proposals. So I don't think AI is being used as heavily to write the proposals, but and AI is not used very heavily to make the grant decision in the final set. But it is used to bring down a large number of documents to a smaller number. There, the concern that is being raised rightfully is that you're just going to index on whatever worked in the past will start becoming more prominent now, rather than new. So it's much harder for a new person to break into that RFP process, to clear the first 2 rounds of the RFP process. Because if you're giving signals of what was selected in the past, or what the strategy was last year, or what has worked well in the past, or any of that, then that is going to go against a new person or a new way of doing things, as compared to an experienced person reading through it and then making that call. So that's really what I see happening in these 2 places.
Yeah, and I suppose even the CSR piece, the first thing that you mentioned might already be happening, right? So the proposals themselves can have very nice narratives of why they're doing something.
Yeah, but I think in CSR, the if you've got to the point where there is actually a conversation between the grant maker and the potential grantee, then actually it's very, very human based.
Right.
In fact, excessively in some cases, right? Less on data and more on relationships.
But at the top of the CSR funnel, are you seeing just the sheer volume explode? I mean, are there now more proposals for any opportunity?
Not necessarily, because there aren't more NGOs.
Right. But the entire population of NGOs may not have applied earlier, right? Because now the marginal cost of application has gone down. So that's not translating to more applications.
Not as much, no. Haven't seen the volume of proposals go up.
Okay.
but have seen the quality get better and the process of sorting through them get much faster through AI.
And are you seeing any compression, because lots of studies have shown that AI compresses the quality, right? The bell curve compresses. There's a rightward shift, but there's also compression. So the poorer,
Yes.
so that's happening. You're seeing that.
That happens, and which is why when you're searching through 500 proposals for an RFP, if it's all become in a compressed curve, then
Yeah.
what are you going to pick? You still have to pick 10 because the eventual decision maker can't see more than 10. So the journey from 500 to 10 is now a far, actually, I don't know, is it worse or better? Hard to say, but it's faster, and that some either a false negative or a false positive is getting created in that process. Nobody's actually even gone in to verify which one it was.
Yeah, no, super interesting. Veena, I'll turn to you. Are you seeing any differences in how AI is showing up? As somebody who writes proposals, have you seen AI enter your own process or the process of different peer organizations, or even the discussions you might be having formally, like off the record kind of conversations about AI and maybe even AI slop?
I mean, since you're generators of slop, I don't know whether I'm as objective, but I would say that, and I'm therefore going to say something positive about AI. From a grant as a grantee, one thing that we would really struggle with is endless rewriting and reporting stuff. So, for example, we had a donor that just yesterday was asking, like a 400 cell Excel spreadsheet to be filled in on something, right? Or we had so that's basically on the reporting side. But sometimes you have, and with well labs, we're not generally spraying and praying. We've got a roadmap and we're really targeting very specific hypothesis that we are pursuing. So we're not basically sending hundreds and hundreds of proposals. But what often happens is you're sending the same proposal because we know what we want to do, many different people, and all of them have slightly different formats and slightly different RFPs. And so, from our perspective, uh, it's just saving us a ton of time, kind of repurposing our existing proposals to target different types of donors. Because, like I said, what we want to do is the same. So, from that was probably experienced as slop by the funder, but for us, it seems a much more efficient way of doing things. So I would, and honestly, on the reporting side, I mean, the amount of time that used to traditionally get reported to report slightly different for 16 different donors is a lot. And I think that I would much rather my team spend their time seriously thinking about learnings and documenting that really, really well, but then having the report generation itself be done by AI. So I am therefore kind of much more optimistic about it than the recipients of the slop that we are generating is. I'd love to hear from the funders if, yeah.
Let me just ask you a follow-up question, right? So obviously your organization has deep technical expertise on a few domains, right? And when you apply to grants, I'm sure there are other organizations who don't have that technical expertise, let's say in water, in sustainability, and so on. And AI would make it very easy for them to write a proposal against those topics, right? So are you picking up some conversation from the people you're applying to that they are for the topics that they would otherwise normally just get 2, 3, 4 proposals from technically qualified organizations, that they are getting a much larger number of proposals from organizations who may be in adjacent areas, so not completely irrelevant, but certainly with not the same level of expertise? Are you picking any of that
I
up?
don't think that's happening yet. I think it's still early enough in this because what we're doing is sufficiently technical that even to be able to mimic it, you need even to ask the right questions of your AI bots to be able to say, can you frame it in this way? There's a certain level of technical expertise involved. So I don't think we're seeing it yet. I imagine that in a year or two, when people have really caught up and they say, okay, let's mimic what that organization is doing, you might get there. I'm not seeing it yet. I imagine it'll be, but I do think that from what Sumit said also, people are looking at your past track record in kind of filtering through, and I therefore think that it's harder for somebody who's brand new to be able to successfully mimic what the level of technical expertise a much more technical organization would have. So I'm not seeing it yet on that side. Where we might see it is things like where it's a little more generic, like you have like the Bezos AI fund, which I was a judge for for one of those, the Earth Fund. And that there you're kind of seeing it's a much more general prompt saying, tell us your AI applications for environmental impact. And people are then able to take like a little kernel of an idea and then be able to put in it. Then you're getting like thousands of applications.
Yeah.
So I think once it gets a little more general, you're going to catch a wider net, maybe not for the very, very specific narrow.
So the whole innovation challenge territory, right? These multi-million innovation challenge, those are probably going to get spammed and not spammed, but slopped over. Okay, so now let's turn to the problem piece of this, right? So what problems are most worrying you or not? I know at least Arjun is more on the optimist side right now. So there's three categories of problems I want to point out, and tell me if any of these resonate. The first is obviously the false positive error, right? Which is where an organization that doesn't have that expertise or deep connection to that geography or that community, they create a signal which then gets funded. So that's the false positive. The false negative is because you're so overwhelmed with just the sheer volume, you somehow don't pay attention to a signal from a deserving organization. And they may or may not have used AI, especially if they've not used AI, their signal will probably be a little raw. It may not be as polished as the other signals. So that's a second type of error. And the third is the problem convergence, right? So Nature, they released a study last year, I think late last year, which found that grant proposals that have been drafted with AI assistance are actually A, more likely to get funding. So, but B, they're less likely to be more risky. So they're more conservative proposals. If you use AI, it sort of converges to the mean. So you're not sort of creating outlier ideas, but if you do that, you're also most likely to get funding, right? So there are three risks. Number one, false negatives. Number two, false positives. Number three, less innovation, okay, and more kind of conservative ideas. So and there might be a fourth and a fifth which I haven't mentioned, but I want to pick up from go to all of you and see if you are worried about this, if it's showing up. So Arjun, let's start with you. Given that you are funding technology heavy, technology dense ideas.
Gates Foundation, having been in this space for a while and being very visibly in this space for a while, has always been the recipient of a large volume of slop, human generated or AI generated or otherwise, right? So it's been there. It's not gone away. We frequently, you take any channel that the Gates Foundation has anywhere, you will find spam and slop goes with it. It's a consistent thing. When you're that visible, it follows you around, right? So we've had good. I think the organization's evolved. I think some good ways of filtering through this, and many of those solves involve working with very, partners who we trust implicitly, right? Like for example, governments. If you're working with a government partner and there's public funding going into some work, the justification that needs to go into public funding is much more rigorous than what we would do or we could do, right? Because the process, so it makes it much more. It's a much more rational thing for us to do to help organizations, institutions, researchers, and startups, for example, work to meeting the criteria of a rigorous public funding requirement. That okay, if you want to get into say public health deployment, or if you want to get into large scale deployment in the agricultural sector, and you're going to go through a government channel, then you need to be procured in some way, and that's a maturity equation. And helping multiple organizations walk that maturity curve is generally a no regrets angle to go with, right? So now the question is how early in the life cycle of an organization can we legitimately start? And in that regard, we've always been limited, I believe, because of the transaction overheads that we carry per investment. And that hasn't changed significantly, right? So our bottleneck is somewhere completely different. And as a result, what we are now focusing on, at least what I'd be keen that we focus on more and more, is enabling those partners who we work with to be our sort of large catchment area for so that nobody who's innovative and is doing good work is missed in that sense, like the governments and the institutions, they have sound mechanisms of doing better quality checks using better tools, whether it's AI, whether it's process, whether it's training, whether it's epistemic discipline. I don't know what's going to make a difference, but all of those capacities to get built amongst our core partners is where we see it going. And slop or not, good process is good process, right? So, and I really do believe that the positive effects of this, particularly in this domain, and there are lots of reasons to be very concerned about AI and do lots of different things: safety, security, trust, alignment. All these things are new areas of concern. But I think just in the regard of donor engagement, I feel like it's going in a positive direction, simply because if your donor is using AI well in any way, shape, or form, there is a double filter effect, right? So whether the organization used AI well or not is also somewhat nullified by the AI that the donor is using to process it. If you're doing a better job of increasing your quality of filtration to hit the things that you want to do, whether it is gratification, whether it's numerical impact. I mean, at the end of the day, somebody gets gratification from seeing numerical impact, right? So there's always gratification at the back of it somewhere. But the the ROI loop can be really shortened, I feel. And in that regard, the only question is, have we made the marginal cost of generation zero enough, or as close to zero and as accessible to as many people in different places as possible, so that somebody who's a Gondi speaker who's in class 10 and wants to propose water filtration program in their part of Bastar is able to articulate it at the same level as somebody from, say, IIT Delhi would in a lab environment. At least given a given format, that, okay, please tell me your unit cost, please tell me your this, please tell me your that, given you a format. If you can meet that format now, despite not knowing great English or great math, but you have a process which you have repeatedly experimentally tested and you want to articulate it, those possibilities are now available. And I think that's the direction of travel that I'd love to see this go in.
Yeah, super important point about how it can actually be a great equalizer, and it can allow folks who actually have that technical knowledge, that community knowledge, to package there and speak the vocabulary that certain donors or certain parties care about. And the other point that you're making about the point in the growth, right? Because your transaction cost is high, you're not maybe touching the very, very early stage folks all the time, and where so it also varies, I suppose, on the exogenous and endogenous signals, right? So if you are a large organization, you already have some track record, and then AI you can't distort so much. So maybe the problem is more acute on folks who are looking at that very, very early stage and so on. I'll turn to you, Veena, now. You talked about it's a memorable line. You only half of the data are wrong. We don't know which half, right? And I want to sort of extend this to AI and what this does. You have this line about cute pictures of women farmers with goats. Sometimes are more important in swaying the decision, right? And linked to, let's say, the gratification piece that Sumit was talking about. Are you seeing that as a risk that people will start almost consciously working backwards with personas of donors they're applying to, and then doing whatever it takes to get that funding, right? And is that necessarily a bad thing? Would love your take on both of those things, both of those parts of the question.
I mean, I don't think that they're going to do more of it than they were doing before, because people were always doing whatever it took to get the funding. It's just that AI is assisting them to do it more efficiently, right? I mean, I don't think before people were saying that I don't care what the donor thinks, I'm going to do what I want. So I think that you're going to see, I mean, and Sumit said this as well, you're going to see more smooth storytelling. And one, there's a positive to that, because one thing that you saw before is a lot of grassroots organizations were terrible at English. They actually knew the story, and now they are able to actually tell their story a lot better, and that is unequivocally a good thing, right? But I think that I also have a further positive on even the data side of it. I think that what AI is allowing us to do, even from the data side, is to be able to mine things a lot better than we were able to do before. And it may be that we mine it and we're not actually finding any impact. I mean, but I think that I'm still hopeful that if donors are able to kind of send the right signals to how they kind of want to talk to grantees, what kind of information they get, and so on, our ability to get very, very very get signals from very complex data sets has gotten so much better in the last year that I'm still kind of positive, because suddenly what we are seeing is lots of an example, a lot of CSR grantees coming to us and saying, we have exactly what you said. We have gigabytes of data. We don't know what's in it. We have like 15,000 spreadsheets. We don't know if it's all rubbish or not, but we're willing to give you these spreadsheets. Can you massage them and tell us what we've learned out of 15 years of impact? And it's just not something we were able to do before. So I'm still falling on the overall positive of what we can do, both to kind of understand if we've had an impact, both to be able to challenge our partners to be able to give evidence of impact. I think we've just gotten that much better. So, of the three categories that you said, I'm less worried about false positives, because I feel you can still go and check of people and you can kind of see. And yes, some early stage people are going to lose out, but on the other hand, am I losing early? You also have more early stage people who are able to even access some of these platforms than they were. So I feel like that comes out in the wash. But I am worried about the innovation part of it, because, and that's again more from our donors kind of setting the risk parameters high enough so they are able to, once it goes through, and even the engines that are reading and sorting out these RFPs, are they able to, are they leaving out the most innovative ideas because they're just so out there? So I would, of the three categories, I would worry the most about innovation, but I'm actually positive overall about what AI is allowing us to do in terms of testing for effectiveness, mining through large amounts of data, finding signals, that sort of thing.
Right. Sumit, I'd like to now bring you in. When you were chatting, you were talking about how AI now makes it very easy to create data, to explain a story, to create metrics, also maybe even multimedia, right, of pictures and videos of impact. So can you tell me about how was the way you're thinking about this? Is this a problem? Do you think this will become a big problem going forward? Yeah.
Yeah, no, it is a very real problem, because it is less of a problem in institutional grant making, because the processes do require fairly significant interaction before a decision is made. So you might leave out a deserving person, but it's not common to end up giving a grant to somebody who's not deserving, because there's just way too many steps to the whole thing. But in retail, there's always been fraud in retail. Uh, there are enough stories about people coming and getting you to. We see receipts with our names on it, which we've never issued, doing the rounds, right? And it's just so much easier to build all of that now. So the ease with which you can tell an emotionally strong, convincing story to a donor who's looking for a quick decision is just become very, very easy. It's no different from every other form of impersonation or inaccuracy going on social media. We are a tiny little category and in very, very large market.
Yeah.
It's literally like you walk into a mall and we are worrying about integrity issues in the smallest shop in that whole floor, when the whole floor is full of nothing but integrity issues, right? So that's the reality of online giving at this point of time.
And also post giving, right? Once the donation has been made, even then, just the proof of work and all of that.
Yeah, that's so. If you don't send a report, you have a big problem. But most reports have a 3% report, right? So most donors will largely rely on the fact that a report did come, was good enough. The mental space to be able to go in deeper on a decision you made a while back is just very, very hard for most people to do. So it's a fact. The harder part is that It could be folks like us or institutional givers who do go into data. Classical case of skilling, right? You're looking at beneficiary data, you're trying to figure out how many people got skilled and what happened afterwards. Your ability to produce wrong data is just become way easier now. You can build a 1,000 people list without any obvious errors, which will not show up when you do your regular analysis. But all of it could just be wrong. So the need for, I think the institutional donors are reacting to that pretty well in any case now, and will do more, where you will see deeper evaluations, you will see more in-person interactions, visits, uh, live recordings, all of that kicking in. And of course, there'll be a ton of AI tools which will make it easier. For example, while it's easier for me to generate an Excel sheet that's fraudulent for skilling, AI may open up the door to finally allow me to see actual income figures of what happened afterwards. That's very hard to beat. Nobody has it today. All the money that goes into skilling, there is no way to judge what happened with actual income enhancement, which was the whole point. If there was a way to get that signal from somewhere, and hopefully it can be a long-term signal that can be tracked over time, that makes the whole ecosystem 10x better. So that's where it probably is headed. But in retail, it will cause a lot of pain.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that in. I want to now move to a slightly upstream piece about how donors themselves, all of us are humans, right? So when donors give money, they're individuals who are immersed in a certain information environment. You're getting information about what is an investable theory of change, which is a good organization, right? What does the science say? You're picking up information from informal channels like LinkedIn or reports or discussions with peers and people you visit, right? So, and that information environment itself is getting filled with a lot of AI slop, or AI artifacts. And number two, the fact that AI now enables things to be done super quickly with a certain base level of fluency, right? The narrative fluency that Arjun was talking about. So I have a two-pronged question. First, how worried should we be that the information environment that all of us find ourselves in, especially the upstream actors, that's also getting homogenized because A, there's a lot of AI slop with some incentives. B, algorithms have confirmation bias and it's sort of you get into this echo chamber. That's the first part. And number two, when let's say you as a donor are used to a certain narrative fluency in the proposals you receive, right? And then let's say because AI now makes it easy to write up a proposal in 3 hours, let's say, do our timelines for these things, right? When somebody says that I will take a month to send a proposal or 3 months to do a research project, whereas you've sort of gotten used to also getting that within a week, do your baseline expectations change to almost assume that AI will do something, right? And then what does that do to quality, and what does that do in terms of penalizing organizations who are actually trying to do the right thing and go there and visit? So yeah, so anyone who wants to take a stab at that, maybe Arjun, you can start. Yeah.
Here, I like to use AI for validation because and here's where I also think it's important that the marginal cost of AI use has to go to zero or as close to it as possible for the most number of people, because otherwise you're basically playing on an asymmetry on token cost. But that aside, one thing that we see is that if you're getting the same keyword and over again, right, and something that the time to that becoming a signal that is clearly showing up as a spike is very short now. So, for example, privacy by design is one of those really strange terms which I find in a lot of proposals that come in from a digital point of view, right? That the system has got privacy by design. Anytime I get that in a proposal, I have a algorithm now that sends off 5 other questions, which are the next gate of passing. Have you even thought this through? Because it's not a straightforward concept. Most people haven't, and many people include it as a matter of course कि अच्छा ठीक है डालना है तो we have to put privacy by design, otherwise digital system नहीं pass होगा. What that basically allows for now is that anybody who was looking for that keyword as a checkpoint can't do that anymore. Now you have to look for that keyword, find the checkpoint, and say, okay, 5 other questions. What's your consent logging mechanism? Who's auditing it? What are your DPDP compliance rules? Those parts wala bhej doge, immediately changes the equation. And I think that automation process also helps weed out bad stuff quickly. So I mean, that's my take on it, but would love to hear.
Arjun, let me just press. Do you think that is a robust long-term solution, or do you think that's an arms race kind of solution, right? Where people will figure this out, the agent will fill up that second level of detail.
And at some point, you'll have to start also recognizing that this entire discourse is becoming pointless because it's been gamed entirely, right? And then you discard it and go to a new one. I think the marginal cost of shifting patterns is going to become lower, right? Because you've got generative tools now, essentially. So as you build generative tools, you have to build discriminatory tools of equivalent capability. Otherwise, you're in trouble fundamentally. So that's just cognitive balancing, right? So I think, and I keep telling folks who tell me this, that I was critical thinking going to go away in the age of AI. I said, no, I think just the packet size is going to increase. And your obviously cognitive load is going to go up for a lot of us. And it's going to be the next tool use shift, right? The horse riding to car driving kind of stuff. It's a tool shift.
Veena, what about you? What are you thinking about the information environment in which I think we're all living, and how is that shaping us, and also expectation settings, right? Have you started now noticing a certain kind of AI speed impatience in your own team, in the donor team? Yeah.
I mean, there is some, and some of that is also justifiable in the sense of saying, produce reports faster and so on. I feel it's also hopefully, I mean, okay, if you're doing it right, it should also produce more discipline. So instead of saying that you wait for the end and produce a report, like now, if you're documenting serious findings nicely throughout, right? Then at the end, producing the AI report on it, generated report should be legitimate. Earlier, anyway, what people were doing is waiting till the end of the project and producing stuff. So I think it could have a positive impact also, which is that it imposes some kind of discipline throughout. I'll give you one little example of an organization we work with. So there was a consortium we were working with. There was a grassroots organization which was doing some water intervention, and we were kind of acting as the science and certifying agency about whether the impacts that they were having was actually being met or not. And the idea was we had set up what's called a community-based continuous monitoring system. That means the community was supposed to be taking pictures of the structure and whether the ponds were filling and so on, and sending it. And then there was a WhatsApp bot which was parsing it to kind of get the time series data on the ponds and then arrive at something. Now, there was a grassroots partner who was resisting it. And they said, no, we will do this, and our people only write things on paper and pen. And they wrote it on paper and pen. And we said, okay, he can do it old fashioned way, paper and pen, no problem. What they sent us was a perfect sine curve. So we realized it's impossible that any rain event is going to produce kind of a perfect sine curve. So we went back and said, this is impossible to get. And in a sense, we made them go back and say, no, from next month, we are only going to take the WhatsApp, the photographs that the farmer's taking. And so actually, it was a case where, ironically, the slop was being generated by the manual system, and it was the AI WhatsApp bot which was actually overcoming the slop. So I'm just saying sometimes the speed and the structure can result in, yes, there is an expectation. Sometimes it's unrealistic, especially on turnaround and so on. But sometimes I think it may result in greater proper behavior, if you want to call it that, more discipline, that sort of. I mean, I don't know whether I'm being unnecessarily optimistic today, but yeah. So
Right. So let me now turn to the macro kind of picture, right? Or supply demand picture. If especially like Arjun, if you're saying the marginal cost of tokens is falling, it will probably fall. Access will become large, right? What is not so obviously when the marginal cost falls, the supply of of those proposals, of those ideas, of those notes will increase. And it will be widely distributed. But what is not shifting at the same level is just the supply of capital, right? So you have more proposals chasing the same number of dollars, roughly speaking. If anything, declining dollars, because philanthropy globally is going through a downturn. Now, when you start sort of doing that, then what sort of do you think obviously it's not going to be a great outcome. You'll see more competition. You'll see maybe shorter kind of cycles of funding, and already that cycle compression is also happening. Fewer multi-year grants are being declared. A lot of CSR money in India is just 1 year long, right? And which doesn't lead to building deep capacities. So there's already a lot of structural weakness, and this weakness could get further affected. Do you think certain mechanisms, I'm not talking about the redesign part of it. So there have been, for instance, 2024, 2025, the National Health Academy, I forget exactly what it's called in the US, they have put in a mechanism which restricts the number of grant applications to 5, I think, in the US health system, where a health researcher can only apply to 5 opportunities. I'm forgetting what the acronym of that organization is. But do you think there's just no way without bringing those kinds of mechanics in? Otherwise, we'll all be just flapping around.
Those mechanics, at least in the deep science, deep tech research space, are definitely coming in. So as the Anusandhan National Research Foundation's Maha missions have launched an AI for science and engineering and medtech, these rules have been laid out very clearly in there, that how many people can apply for what, and in what capacities. I think there's some, and I don't want to misquote, so, but there was a limitation on how many you could be a PI on versus how many you could support, and there's distinction between the two. So it was a pretty nuanced selection process in that regard. And I feel like, and to Veena's point earlier, right? Like, I feel like that epistemic discipline of maintaining your log well, that any scientific researcher, any scientific process follower will do, right? Like, how did I arrive here should be auditable for a human as much as it is for an AI. And I think that discipline, people who are interested in applying that have generally always been better researchers. And they will now find themselves able to, and again, to Veena's point, right? Like, if you've done your work, at the end of it, the AI tool putting a report together is so much better than you having to then also now learn the skill of Word and PowerPoint and, putting the nice pictures together and then paying a designer for it. It goes away. And I found myself taking 9 years of GitHub history and compressing it into a product roadmap report and sharing it with folks to build beyond that. So version 1 through 2 took 9 years, and version 2 to 3 took 10 days. So I mean, I think it's really a question of human intent. Yes.
Yeah. So, and this whole selective, these rules about limited opportunities you can apply to, this requires a big paradigm shift, right? Mental model shift. I mean, we did some research on the current mental model of a lot of NGOs who raise funds, and it's really a spray and pray model, right? And it's a rational model because there's so little transparency, there's so little prediction right now on what gets funded, not even in the retail space, but even in the formal philanthropy space. So that the rational response right now is spray and pray, right? Because you don't know. In very, very few domains, for very, very few organizations, is there a high, is the grant anticipated and the probability is high? So how do you think this shift will happen where we move, because we can move into two very different equilibriums. One where the spray and pray will become worse. The marginal cost of applying has almost gone to zero. So you just start going everywhere, right? And then you have a tool and you apply to 1,000 applications overnight. On the other side, you've got this very, very focused way of applying to only those 5 opportunities. But the mental model is not there at all. The paradigm is not there at all. So this has to move as a system, right? And probably has to move differently in different parts. The retail answer has to be different. The strategic philanthropy answer has to be different. So any thoughts, anything that you're picking up, any conversations that you've had which talk about this kind of stuff? Sumit?
If you look at retail today, I think more is welcome because it will only bring in a larger, the constraint in the retail ecosystem is the number of donors that are currently willing to give online. Total number of donors is very high. The numbers that are actually willing to transact online is very low. A wider range of options only helps that move forward as long as those are real options. Right? On CSR, it's actually the reverse. For most large grant makers, NGO capacity available to absorb the kind of money that needs to be deployed is actually lower than what's needed. So capital's ahead of absorption capacity in several areas, not in everything, but in several areas. Right. So at least on the CSR side, I don't see the system going in a direction where it restricts how many people are eligible. The problem, in fact, is that there aren't enough new organizations coming up doing genuine work, doing it at a large enough size that it can become relevant for a grant that a CSR donor can give. It's a supply issue. So where I see this going is that you will have a lot more people applying to a lot more places. It's easier for you to contact 100 CSR donors now than it was in the past. So I see it going more towards more people applying everywhere and the system not trying to tap that down, at least in the near term. But it's
what you said about CSR money not being the bottleneck and actually absorptive capacity being the bottleneck. So which verticals are you seeing this in, and where do you think capital is less and capacity is more?
There are quite a few. So most if you see the flagship project declarations by most companies that we want to scale so many lakh people, we want to do ABC. If you add up the total capacity available for NGOs that are more prominent in that space, and there'll be like 20, 30 names that will come up in most places, that won't add up. A lot more CSR teams are hiring people now internally and starting to do projects themselves because they're not able to clear all the filters and still land up with enough capacity to give grants and work with that alone. Employability is one space. Education less. So education, we don't face that problem as much. Nutrition is one space. There are lots of small organizations, but very few large ones. And the small ones will not clear the filters that are mandated from a governance perspective. So I don't see a constraint coming in on how many places you can apply or any kind of restrictions being put on that. You'll just see a lot faster filtering, which has its own issues. But
understood.
Yeah.
No, super interesting. I actually hadn't thought about that at all. Veena, what about you? I mean, where do you think this will land? Like the spray and pray or the selective thing in the ecosystem you are operating within?
I mean, so I think maybe we are using spray and pray in two slightly different ways, because one category is NGOs say, I will work on anything. So I will send some to education, some to livelihood, some to skilling, some to water, some to everything. And they are spraying and praying across domains. That is a very different thing from an NGO saying that I'm working in this area and I want to do, help cotton farmers in Raichur. And now I'm going to send my proposal on cotton farmers in Raichur to 50 different organizations. So I assume when you're saying spraying and praying, you meant the first one, where the first one is problematic because they don't have expertise, so on and so forth. The second one is actually positive, that they might not have had as many, just a physical sheer time to fill in it in the format for cotton spraying and cotton farmers in Raichur to 50 different people, but now they can. And the second one actually is a good thing. Should be, I mean, you want them to have a greater reach because they don't know who is going to be funding, cotton farmers in Raichur. So I think for the first one, you of course, I think there are ways that AI will eventually catch up to be able to look at like credibility, look at the past history, their social media, and I think that as Arjun was saying, probably the ability to discriminate will rise at the rate that people are. In the second one, that's also problematic from a donor's perspective, because now everybody is sending you their proposals on their particular little thing, which is still problematic because now you're still getting 100x the number of proposals. There, I feel what is required is better coordination among donors, because I do think one problem in India is every donor that has complained to me that you NGOs are not collaborating in this landscape and working together is also not collaborating with other donors. And many donors will come and say, we are working in this landscape, nobody else can work in this landscape. So I think that I hope that the first one will get solved by AI staying one step ahead of the game. But for the second one, it actually needs donors to kind of work very differently. And that I am less optimistic about, which means that everybody now is sending their proposals to 120 people. But now the chances of any one of those proposals going through is kind of just become, a crapshoot.
Right, right. Uh, Arjun, I just saw you leave. Are you back on this? If you
Yeah,
were
sorry,
saying,
I was just switching devices.
okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So actually, I was going to come to you and ask you the same question. I mean, do you see any moves within the ecosystem, at Gates or other kind of strategic donors on restrictive kind of funding and only inviting a few people or having some quant kind of ceilings?
I mean, that's always been the model we followed. We've never been in that sense. I mean, we've like I said, we've had structures for the volume-based work, like your grand challenges or your government partnerships with folks like the India AI Mission or the Anusandhan National Research Foundation. These are sort of the places, and these are the partners we work with on that volume piece. And so our model has always been relatively selective in terms of who's even invited to apply. And I suspect that that may actually change towards being able to evaluate more proposals, if anything, because a lot of our transaction process, I mean, the Word document and the Excel sheet filling out, it does become a lot easier. And then reevaluating if you have fixed formats. I mean, for a long time, I've been asking, why don't we have web forms that people can quickly click through to apply? And then do the first cutoff and not have it be long form, which is basically prone to slop, and have it be very specific questions, because we do have very specific questions that we want to ask people. What we do think this might also help do is have the questions be better explained to people who don't necessarily speak English or who may not speak that particular term, right? Explain this questionnaire to me and ask me the questions that I need or I might be able to answer best. And then that matching might make things a lot easier. I think so in that regard, I see this going in that direction more than anything else. I think we are pretty much as restrictive as we can be at this point. So I think, yeah, I think from here it's only being able to expand the catchment area, if anything.
So let me actually segue with that into the last question before we have the audience also ask the question. So, which is about catchment areas, right? And who gets left out as the world becomes more and more agentic AI, right? So the agents are going to get deployed for discovery, right? When you're trying to build an investable pipeline or a fundable pipeline. So for instance, when I was at Dalberg, we would often get asked by clients to build up a deal flow, right? So you go and scout organizations that you can invest in this topic, that topic. So you have a funnel and you discover many organizations who wouldn't have good digital presence, right? So you'd have to go and meet them and carry out the standard due diligence. Now, one of the things that obviously will happen is as the world becomes more agentic, you'll have agents scouring for information, and you can actually build a very good pipeline which deserves a double click in an hour, right? On a certain theme or a couple of hours. But the people for whom the organizations that are not there on the digital don't have a digital footprint or don't have a updated digital footprint. They might have a website, and many organizations don't update it with the recent work they've done, etc. So those folks then don't even figure in the pipelines that the agents will create, right? Do you see that this will first of all create a pressure to have a digital presence all the time, and especially for the retail giving side of things, Sumit, which the organizations are smaller, they probably have less capabilities, and then if that becomes the new normal, then should there also be support to enable everyone to have a digital footprint, right? Without which they are not even agent discoverable. Right now, you've got agent to agent kind of optimization that's happening. How do you get agents to talk to each other? That kind of handshakes to happen. So, what does the world look like if agents are the primary kind of AI agents are the way in which some research gets done, and then who it would otherwise marginalize, who would become invisible, and then what are the correctives for that? So I'd love maybe all of your takes on that. We can start with Sumit, then Veena, then Arjun.
I think that's a reality that not having digital presence, not being able to use any of the AI platforms, tools out there will become a real problem. In a way, that's still the case, right? So, which is why there is a layering of aggregators. There's a whole bunch of grassroots organizations that have no ability to approach donors directly because they do not have that presence, they do not have that channel, and therefore you have larger NGOs who act as aggregators for a lot of the smaller ones, and that ladder kind of keeps getting built up. I think it'll get even more layered as this happens. But it's also a fact that it's the same thing as saying, I'm not going to work on a computer. How far will you stretch that?
The only reason so absolutely, I agree with you. There's already an asymmetry, but the delta in the cost of because right now you still need a team to actually go through the internet and figure stuff out, and then
Yeah.
the field versus internet cost right now is going to be much smaller than the field versus AI agent done due diligence, right? So the expansion of cost deltas will increase, right, and hence the propensity will reduce.
Yes.
That's the question I'm asking.
So the ones who are more prominent will get a much larger share, right? It gets worse from where it is. Sorry, from where it is today. Which So let's take a hypothetical scenario, right? There is this very large NGO in the child protection space that has a very solid digital presence that is able to capture all of these trends very, very well, and therefore disproportionately gets a greater share of all additional capital getting freed up in the future because agents are making the decision rather than humans. For them to be able to deploy that capital is where my guess would be that they'll have to build these networks further down. Because finally the work that you're doing requires you to be at the grassroots. That constraint is not going to get relaxed. But what it does is it puts the grassroots organization at a much deeper disadvantage because the share of the money that you get, the flexibility you have to use it the way you know best, all of that keeps going away. With every layer that reduces.
Yeah.
So more unequal, no different from wealth distribution in a way, right? Which is getting worse. Power will keep getting concentrated at the top.
Yeah.
Especially in retail where you're relying on signals like these to say what is credible and what is not. You don't really think too much before deciding.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For sure. Veena?
I think there is some correlation between, firstly, this is already true. Agentic AI is just going to make it more so. And I think Sumit said that as well. I think there is some correlation between an organization's ability to tell stories and record and maintain a digital presence and their fundamental systems, maturity of systems to absorb capital and deploy capital. Because let's be honest, if you want to run a really, really large, sophisticated child rescue organization, you do need to have very sophisticated systems on the ground, people's ability to communicate with each other, so on and so forth, which in today's world requires sort of some level of digital maturity. So I have a feeling that, I've seen a lot of grassroots organizations that do really good work on the ground, but they actually can't absorb more capital because their systems in general are not mature. So what I'm trying to say is your digital presence is a signal of, typically highly correlated, not 100%, but highly correlated with your overall systems maturity. And so then, yes, you are going to see sort of winner takes all situations. What I'm hoping though is that there will emerge a set of intermediary players which will tell people how do you scrub and update your website automatically from your YouTube channel and your field WhatsApp group or whatever. And maybe there's somebody will come up with a solution like, we will keep this virtual website for you which is automatically updating, just give us access to your YouTube channel, your CRP videos, your WhatsApp groups, and so on. So it's possible that you might be able to solve some of the pure signaling part, but you would still need to have your CRPs uploading videos. You would need to have your YouTube channel and a WhatsApp group which is properly discussing interesting things, so on and so forth. Do you know what I mean? So if you have those systems in place and it's purely a digital gap, I imagine the market will solve for it. But I do think there's a correlation. If you don't have people who are actually like in any structured way updating, so on and so forth, then your systems themselves are weak.
Fair point, Veena. Arjun, your take on this?
I mean, now I'm going to speak from beyond the Gates experience here. I got into the development sector 3 generations in, right? So I've got people in the family do this for 3 generations. And I spent some time doing software and then came back to this space. And one of the things we were solving for was how do you get voices of citizens to where it makes a difference, which was what CGNet's what I was all about. And um, what we realized is that there's always a 10-to-1 ratio, right? The amount of content you get, filtration to what is noise to signal is one to it was that way back then as well, right? So it was 1,000 voice recordings you'd get on an IVR system, which was basically missed call based. So it was zero marginal cost of use to the customer or the user. They could record up to 3 minutes of audio. CGNet's grants or whatever structure of funding they had paid for the storage to keep those recordings, and then human moderators would sift through it, summarize it, editorially verify it, and then publish, right? So this was a process. And this was an expensive process. It was a largely unsustainable process because uh, Gondi speaking moderators who would stick around for a particular salary, was not high, and you would never have a way to give them a career path beyond this because unless you have a Gondi business, news business, right, of some kind. And so at some point, the economics of it was just breaking down. But now I see it cut to now, right? Earlier this year, I got to know that somebody has gone and developed a Bhili translation model for less than 50 lakh rupees. Data collection, everything included. I feel like this drastic cost reduction in access. Mobiles, when they came in, they allowed these people who had a 2G phone and only the ability to make a missed call to start putting their content on the internet. Obviously, some of it was not content that was of. I mean, but if you think about what is slop versus what is not slop, right? I mean, Instagram and influencers and that entire economy, not all of us find the same influencers interesting. And that is precisely the point, that there is no, I mean, the gratification of donor requirements could be in many ways, shapes, and forms. And if that transaction value cost can be reduced for the entire ecosystem through this, then I think it will go in the direction of more people closing out. I mean, ultimately, the influencer economy is driving household incomes for a lot of people, many of them women. And if that ties into some way how the donor philanthropy world thinks, I mean, it just could be that's the direction of travel. It's entropy and latency driving a lot of this.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that CGNet example, and agree with you fully there. We have 10 more minutes. I'm just going to turn to audience questions. There's a couple of questions. Sanjukta has a question, and I think she's also here. So Sanjukta, you just want to ask a question, unmute yourself and ask the question.
I'm so sorry, Neeraj. Probably in a noisy area, if you don't mind voicing.
You're coming through very clearly. Go ahead.
I think I was speaking to earlier the point that was being made around funding outlier ideas, the point that you were making, Neeraj. And I wonder that similar to that specific example, but also other aspects, how much of this is because of the churn that's coming from assisted writing, or how much of it is just an enhancement of what already existed in the ecosystem, and hence what does it mean to not optimize but shift that paradigm?
Anyone can answer? You have somebody specific in mind?
I'll be curious to hear whoever wishes to.
Okay, cool.
Go ahead, Arjun.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can definitely say that finding outlier ideas is a lot easier now. I mean, it was much. I mean, because you can see what the median is, and there is a median now. It's not. I mean, earlier, if you were only looking at 3 proposals and one of them had an interesting idea, it was like literally 1 out of 3, right? Now you can look through 50 and see, okay, what are the 5 that stand out? And It's actually much easier to do it now statistically, at least for me. So I find myself finding outlier ideas, outlier organizations, I mean, folks, at least in the 5 years I've been at the Gates Foundation, I've had no trouble whatsoever finding folks who are new to the ecosystem, engaging or closing. And to a large extent, data analysis and constantly putting things into a category before evaluating has helped do that. And so I'm finding this to be a much easier way to work, but that's probably potentially also a work style thing.
Thanks, Arjun. Veena, Sumit, do you have anything to add?
I just want to say that I think we shouldn't assume that all funders want to fund outlier ideas. There's lots of funders who are very risk averse. And so I mean, I'd like to start seeing kind of a slider on risk, because the opposite of an outlier idea is high probability of success, right? And there's a lot of donors, CSR in particular, which are really over-indexed on, like, don't give me outlier ideas. In fact, please give me tried and tested ideas. I'm only interested in scale. So I think I think we can kind of calibrate that within the algorithms we have and say we really want things which have never been tried before versus we want things which the preponderance of the evidence shows this will succeed.
Thanks, Veena. Sumit, anything to add? Otherwise, we can go to the second question.
No, let's go to the second one. I think I'm pretty much where Veena is on this one.
Awesome. Elaine has the second question. Elaine, if you're here, do you just want to ask your question? Unmute yourself and ask the question.
Thank you. This is a fascinating conference, I have to say. Thank you very much for putting it on. My question is really, I'm in England, and it's in the context of the difficulty that has been experienced in holding certain organizations to account for harmful content, harmful for children. And there's a certain unregulated quality around a lot of these systems, and I would put AI in that as well. And I'm just wondering to what extent you think that the equalizing positives of what is currently free AI may cause later problems, particularly if, for example, that becomes subscription-based, because it is so expensive to run, or it will become so expensive to run in power and all the associated costs. And if we become too dependent upon it, and I suspect it will be the very smallest groups that will fall away. But I may be wrong. I just wondered what the panel would think. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. That's a very, very important question, thoughtful question. So anyone would like to come in and answer that?
It's a really futurist question. I don't feel I'm completely qualified to be able to kind of figure out how all this is going to play out. It's changing so quickly. I mean, it was equally true of the internet, and the digital divide, as it will be for access to AI, especially if it starts getting more and more expensive. So we have some analogy with what happened with cell phone access and network access and what that has done to access to information. In AI's case, I wonder if there's a negative side to it also, in the sense that communities and societies that have gotten reliant on AI have actually become less able to think. And I'm wondering whether you're going to start seeing different and organizations. You're actually going to start seeing that organizations that have gotten dependent on it have actually gotten weaker over time. I don't know. I don't have enough of a crystal ball, so I'm just throwing some random thoughts there.
Yeah, so just to maybe also, so the question is, if we see a Uberization, right, where the entry, the cost is low, it's nearly free, and then of course the economics aren't working for these model players, they increase the cost dramatically, then what happens when the entire ecosystem grows used to AI, and then the really small NGOs, they can't afford it? do you see the natural equilibrium being where AI as a service becomes subsidized by philanthropy or by government, where everyone has equal access? Is that the equilibrium, or because it's quite clear the economics are not working for the models right now, so it's quite inevitable that they'll start charging more. So where do you think that will land?
Arjun, go ahead. You're most qualified to answer this.
This is the stuff that makes up the stock market ups and downs of the day, right? But I mean, and yes, it's a very futuristic question, and I dare say, I mean, I don't know. I don't think anybody is very well qualified to answer this. There's just not enough observations on that curve to make any kind of a rational prediction about it. And not that I believe that you can rationally predict anything which is a real world curve any which way. So in that regard, I'm very Taleb following in my leanings on probability and randomness. But that said, I think few things which are definitely going to happen is that yes, it is expensive to run today in terms of power and water, and that will have to change if this is going to sustain. And I would invite folks to think about the IBM hard drive being loaded onto the train image of the early 60s, 70s mainframes and punch cards and those days. I think we are very much in that era of AI today. It's the same with fossil fuel based transportation. It's the same with mobile phones. And in that regard, I feel that digital ROI has historically, I mean, in that sense, that's one of the reasons I feel that the digital pace of growth has been so high, because it typically pays for itself in ROI of some kind. The additional bandwidth you open up tends to pay for the investment in innovation. I think energy costs will definitely have to be managed. And there are things like, unlock computing architectures and neuromorphic architectures coming up the pike. Samsung's working on stuff, Intel's working on stuff, radically less energy consuming. We will see more distributed, low power agents interacting with each other, swarms, those sort of constructs showing up. And I mean, I really do believe that the fundamental equations of physics don't change, right? Energy, entropy, latency, these remain the same. And cognition to entropy, cognition to latency, cognition to energy ratios will drive everything. It's all, I mean, so far we know that there is Moravec's paradox. When things don't learn how to do the small things as well as it learn to do the large things, right? The human mobility, that dexterity of the hand has not been replicated yet in machine. So there are certain things that we are anyway still putting ourselves in a very different category in. I think this is the stuff that is all the rage and the leading edge of AI ethics as well. Jury's out on this, but one thing I can definitely say is energy consumption, this marginal cost of inference going to zero is the natural order of things, because I mean, that's what happened with computers, right? We went from big mainframes in laboratories to watches and smartphones which are more powerful than them today in the very short span of 20 years. I suspect it will be shorter for AI in that regard.
Yeah, thanks for sort of pointing to that curve. Yeah, and that sort of brings us to the close of the session. Elaine, hopefully that answered the question for you. I've really enjoyed the last 90 minutes. Veena, Arjun, Sumit, thanks so much for being such a lovely panel. And I thought we had a wonderful free-ranging discussion, touching upon at least some important questions, if not the answers, because obviously this is evolving. Truly enjoyed it. Thanks so much for taking time for this. We'll be putting this up online after edits, and this will reach out to a lot of people, and also will create some written pieces around this. We'd love to co-write some of that with you. One last thing, we are also, to all the ones who are listening especially, which Diksha has also just typed, we are creating this online archive of Slop called the Museum of Slop. And you can just click the link and record your audio story of your experience with Slop. We'll launch this like tomorrow with a few stories, but hopefully it will keep on growing and bring different perspectives. So that's just a small note. Thanks again for this panel, Veena, Sumit, Arjun. The next panel starts in about 30 minutes. So any of you who want to dial in, please join the same link then. Thanks and take care.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you. Great conversation.
Thank you. Take care.